Coming up on the Purposeful podcast.
We typically learn more from our failures than we do our successes, right? Um, and there's a reason for that. I mean, we learn what not to do, and we're not when we fail. That's not comfortable to us. We don't enjoy that. So that makes us grow. That makes us learn.
You're listening to the Purposeful Podcast.
All right. Welcome to this episode of the Purposeful Podcast. I'm Matt.
I am Saki.
We're very happy that you've joined us for this episode. And we've got 3 topics that we're going to discuss. But before we talk about those topics, man, nice to see that you're back safely from Philly. How was your trip?
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. My trip was very good. I enjoyed it very much. We had a great time. It was cold. I got out of there right before the nor'easter came into town. And
timing.
Yep. And I'm back in the sunshine state of Florida. How about yourself?
Man. Well, I didn't have to deal with the same kind of cold that you had to deal with, but it's been a little chilly here. You know, you missed all the 20-something degree overnight lows that we've had in the last week. So
my if I didn't see it on my weather app, I wouldn't have believed it.
I know. Well, my lawn almost started growing back. You know, it was like, hey, it's almost February. It's time to turn green. And then it was like, oh no, never mind. Never mind.
Got a little year-round lawn care in the state of Florida. The beauty of living.
That's the truth, but that's all right. So anyhow, our 3 episodes tonight, and again, thank you for joining us. So we're talking about getting involved with people that you know, and in a business relationship, that can be a risky thing, and you may want to be wary about doing that. It's common, you know, because people look for people they know, but that can lead to some bad outcomes. So we're going to get into that. And then the next topic is going to be paralysis by analysis. So recently we've talked some about how emotions can lead you astray, and risky behavior leads to risky behavior and increases your chances of losses. This is kind of on the other end of the spectrum completely, and kind of the downsides to being too reluctant to pull the trigger. So we're going to talk about that. And then finally, we're going to get into the issue related to market volatility. You know, we've not had a great start to the year in our stock market indices, and a lot of people are seeing that we've kind of entered correction territory, and there's some emotions at play related to that. So how do you react to that? What's the right play? So we're going to talk about that. But before we get going, we're going to kick this out to the intro.
You're listening to the Purposeful Podcast with Matt Fiebig and Saki Filios.
All right, brother. So the first topic tonight is getting involved in business relationships with friends and family or associates. And this happens all the time, right? You know someone who knows someone, or maybe you go to church with someone, or maybe you're related to someone who can do something, and y'all decide, I'm going to hire that person, or I'm going to go into business with that person, or whatever the case may be. That can be pretty dangerous if you don't really lay out some good ground rules beforehand. So have you had that experience before?
So I've been pretty fortunate for the most part when it comes to starting a business relationship with friends or family. I have done that on several occasions. They've been minor deals though, and nothing too major. I have intentionally declined several opportunities to get into business with friends and family just because of that, because it rarely ends well. There's different dynamics there.
Well, there are different dynamics. I know that I've been involved, and it can be good and it can be difficult. So, for instance, on the good side, a friend of mine and I are involved in this company called Convergent Digital Media. But
I think I know that guy.
I think you are that guy. But you and I, as we do business together, there are some things that make it work. I mean, obviously, we have admiration for one another and we have respect for one another. But we also have the kind of relationship where we're able to talk about pretty much anything, and we're willing to do that. And we take the time to collaborate with one another on a fairly regular basis so that we're on the same page. We know what our goals and objectives are. And, there's a means for both of us to agree on how we're going to do what it is that we want to do. And so in a relationship like that, where the communication is open and where the goals are mutually agreeable to all the parties, in this case, we're able to leverage each other's skill sets, so that you can do things that you're better at than I am, and I can do things that I'm better at than you are. And then hopefully together, we can make this better than it could be if either one of us were trying to do this alone. Now, the flip side is, if you get involved with someone and you're afraid of hurting their feelings, or they're afraid of hurting your feelings, that to me is like the first major red flag, right? I mean, if you can't talk about the things that you're going to need to talk about, it is inevitably going to lead to disaster. And so, you got to be careful about that, because everybody has an agenda, because everybody's trying to go somewhere, everybody's trying to get something done. When I say everybody has an agenda, that isn't necessarily a pejorative. Everybody should have an agenda. But in the case, where like you and I are in business together, our agenda is a mutual agenda, and we're both trying to accomplish the same thing, and we're working together to that end. If you don't have open communication, you may find yourself in a situation where, you start to deviate a little bit, and, one is heading this way and another one starts heading that way a little bit. And then there's going to invariably be conflict, because you're not both trying to reach the same objective. And then that is further exacerbated by difficulty communicating. So if you and I, for example, got to a situation where, I wanted to go this way and you wanted to go this way, well, we're going to sit down and we're going to have a conversation, and we're going to decide, after we work through it, should we go this way, should we go this way, or should we chart a new course? But we're going to agree on what it is that we want to do before we start moving in that direction. If you don't have those open lines of communication, you might find yourself in a situation where you drift further and further apart. And, at some point, the only outcome is going to be a bad outcome. So that's a huge issue. And another huge issue is, you don't really always know people as well as you think you do. I see a lot of people, for example, who look for business collaborators in places like their church. Well, you really need to be careful about that too, because you may assume from your mutual involvement in an organization like a church or a Rotary Club or some sort of organization that you have common goals, common objectives, and common values. But if you haven't actually talked about those, you may find that you don't have as much in common as you think. You may also fall into a trap where you kind of assume something about their skill set or their expertise that might not be accurate, and you don't find out that you're wrong about these judgments that you're making until you're in too deep. Right. And then again, it leads to a painful outcome. So you've been wise to be leery about getting involved with those sorts of situations.
Yeah, I consider
Surely
it
though, you've
more
seen
lucky.
other people do it, right? Or maybe you're related to people who have done it. So what kind of experiences have you had?
Yeah, I have had several people close to me that have been in situations like that. I've got a real good friend of mine that's done it on several occasions, and it was one time it was family, and another time it was friends, and it's painful to watch and it's painful to experience. And I want to kind of elaborate a little bit more and add a couple things to what you were just talking about. Communication is huge, like you said. But there's two other items that I'd like to bring in an equation, and I would like everyone to consider before they enter a relationship, a business relationship with any partner. And two things are, and these two items missing from beforehand are a big reason I think of why people have a lot of issues. One is boundaries. You and I have discussed that before, and people just don't understand the limits, understand the boundaries. And there's a great book written called Boundaries that I think everybody should read before they do that. I think everybody should read it in general anyway. But
Yeah.
the second thing is kind of goes along with boundaries is defined roles. So when you and I started Convergent Digital Media, we sat down, and among other things, we defined our roles, what we were going to do. What did your role look like? What did my role look like? And I think that's lacking from a lot of partnerships. I don't think they discuss beforehand what they expect out of the other one. So what happens is when you get into that business relationship, no one really knows what their role is. So they're kind of stepping in each other's path quite a bit. And that's what makes it a little bit uglier.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And you can actually see that too with assumptions that are made across the spectrum. Like, for example, if you get involved with someone and you think they're going to commit 20 hours a week to your project and they end up committing 5 hours a week, you're going to be left sorely disappointed.
Yeah.
But, if you never really hashed that out beforehand, you don't have a reasonable expectation. You just made an assumption, right?
Exactly.
I think a good rule of thumb is either put it on paper or make sure that the understanding is sufficient that it could be put on paper. It never hurts. In fact, I advise operating agreements in a lot of situations like this as well. If you're going into business together, for example, but if you're doing business, like if you're hiring someone to do handyman work for you or a contractor or anything like that, or, accounting, stockbroker, any of these sorts of professional relationships that you might enter with an acquaintance or a friend or a family member, having a contract is actually a good idea so that everybody understands exactly what you said. This is your role these are your obligations that you're committing to. This is my role, and these are my obligations that I'm committing to. And that way, if there are any questions or if there are any differences of opinion, you've got something to refer back to. But I even would go another step further than that and say, just have an idea of how there would be reconciliatory actions if they're needed. Like, how are you going to come to an agreement about moving forward?
Yep.
Too many times I've seen this with family members myself, where they have a rental house, for example, and they've got a neighbor who's got a kid who needs to rent a house. And so it's like, oh, okay, well, they're my neighbor. I don't know them very well, but surely they wouldn't do me wrong. And so they go ahead and they do the thing, and they get hung out to dry, and they wind up with a terrible tenant. And they don't talk to their neighbor anymore, but it really wasn't that big of a loss, right? Because they were never very close to begin with. That's not a good excuse not to do your due diligence. Background investigation should have been done. A credit check should have been done. All of this stuff, even if it's your neighbor's kid, or maybe especially because it's your neighbor's kid. But doing that sort of due diligence is important, because you don't want to lose relationships because you didn't do the stuff that you should have done to begin with. Life is too short, I think, to have strain in your family and strain with your friends and your colleagues and your associates. Some people can't go back to their church anymore because of hard feelings with people that they did business with at the church. So don't be that person. That's kind of the moral of the story. So do you have
right.
some more thoughts you'd like to throw in?
I agree. Yeah, you bring up an interesting part of that. Family, most of the times it's just not worth losing that relationship. About writing it down, and I stress that, it can be a beautiful thing. You're right. And in a small percentage of times, you get into business with family or friends, it can work out great as long as you utilize each other's strengths correctly and know your boundaries. But it reminded me of something in the real estate business when you were talking about having a way to settle any differences you may have, mediation, whatnot. And it made me think of leases in the real estate business, or any contract really for that matter, on even residential commercial property. But a lot of times when people try to do a deal without an agent, a buyer and a seller, and they don't have a professional or state approved lease they're working with, they forget certain things, or they don't know that certain things should be involved there, like mediation or how to solve differences. Well, that is one of the items in state approved leases and contracts. It dictates to you how a situation is going to be resolved. So once something happens, there's no question mark, right? There's no room for feelings. There's no room for interpretation, and you're not trying to figure it out. Once it happens, there's something you can go back to on paper, and it tells you how to handle it. And I think that is hugely important when you get into a business deal with somebody.
Agreed. And I know we live in a society where a lot of folks are averse to conflict, but and this is betraying my age, right? But I'm with Barney Fife on this. You got to nip it in the bud.
Agreed.
When you see problems, take care of them while they're still small problems. Yeah. Have those conversations while it's only slightly awkward. The longer you wait and the bigger the problems get, the harder it's going to be to deal with those sorts of situations. So, they can spiral out of control quick if you're not careful, and you don't want to lose everything, including your relationships, because you're not willing to have a slightly unpleasant conversation.
Yep.
And you'll find that when you can tackle these things together as a team, you actually build better working relationships and stronger bonds. Adversity really can bring out the best in people, as long as you're collaborating in the right way.
Yep.
So, well, with that, I think it's time to move on to our next topic, which is paralysis by analysis. Just to put a nice little phrase to it. But one thing that commonly happens is people are kind of worried about when is the right time to pull the trigger. Is this opportunity good enough? Is the timing just right? Or should I wait? And I think that, while you want to be conservative, you also have to be cautious that you're not so conservative and so concerned about that you fail to ever launch, right? So since you're Mr. Wait for the perfect pitch before you swing, I'm going to throw this out to you.
Yeah. I was actually just about to say, maybe I should narrate this one and you should answer.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm an interesting guy when it comes to this topic. So I do like the perfect pitch. And coincidentally, when I played baseball in my younger days, I was the leadoff hitter and I did see a lot of pitches and I was always very successful at that. But, the truth of the matter, all kidding aside, is personally, yes, I'm a little bit more conservative and I err on the side of caution a little bit more than I should. I learned to accept that a long time ago. That's who I am. But you're absolutely correct. There's the old adage, you can't make the shot if you don't take it, right? So you've got to take the shot. At some point, you've got to get in the game and you've got to take the shot, or else you're never going to make it. So you're not going to have perfection. Yeah, you might not be the ideal situation, but you definitely need to get started. And I want to kind of throw it back to you though, because there's not too many items that we're probably on different sides of the fence on. This one may be one of them. You may be, I think you feel a little bit differently than I do. So what are your thoughts on this?
And to be clear, where you and I are different is probably like this instead of like this, right?
Well, that's not normal.
When I was in college, I did a fair bit of study about military history, tactics, strategy, things of that nature. And one of the things that I learned, I think, from being exposed to that kind of thinking is that there are real costs involved by failing to act. A lot of times it's better to get forward momentum, get inertia, and make adjustments on the fly rather than to sit still and put yourself in a situation where you can only be reactive instead of proactive. And so I do admit that one of the bigger differences probably between me and you when it comes to this topic is that I am a lot more eager to pull the trigger than you are on a lot of things. And I'm not as concerned about finding the absolute perfect opportunity. I think that for me, at least, the process and the journey has as much to do with the success as whatever the final destination is. Part of part of the reason that I personally feel that way is because I don't think that my goals 5 or 10 years from now are going to be the same as they are right now. And so even though I kind of have an idea of where I want to be headed and the direction that I want to be pointed, I give myself maneuvering room to make adjustments along the way. But I feel like it's important to get started because number one, even if I make mistakes, even if I have issues and obstacles and screw ups along the way, I also have learning opportunities. I'm also improving my skill set along the way because I'm learning, because I'm engaged. I'm also involved with other people, which is a big plus for me. That's important to me. And then I also look at it and think, okay, well, there are so many things that are beyond my control, right? So let me focus on the things that I can control and then make adjustments along the way to those things that I can't control. But the common theme in everything that I just said is the forward progress, the inertia and the momentum. Now, the difference between you and me is you're a lot more likely, going back to the baseball metaphor, you're a lot more likely to hit a home run than I am with my approach. But with my approach, I'm probably going to hit a lot more singles and doubles than you would. And so the way I look at it is my way isn't necessarily better than your way, but my way is more suitable to me and your way might be more suitable to you. That's the reason I say that this is kind of the difference instead of this, because it's not like we have completely different ideas about what the right thing to do is in the grand scheme of things. We're both relatively conservative. We both value saving, investing, paying in cash. A lot of our fundamental values are the same, but I don't like to sit still. I always feel like there are so many opportunities that I need to be working those opportunities and making progress. So
Yeah, and I can understand that. And I feel the same way, and I think most entrepreneurs do. You kind of hit it right on the nose. I just won't do as many deals because of my little more being a little more conservative. But there is a fine line there, and I will grant you that. There's a fine line between making sure you have enough information and just beating a dead horse, as they say, having too much information. So I don't recommend starting too soon, but you also don't want to ever start. So I know people listening, they say, well, that doesn't solve anything for me, but you'll know. And the way to tell is you just need to understand. I mean, and I guess that's really what it comes down to for me. I like to invest in items and start businesses that I understand. And once you understand that, there's a shorter learning curve and it's easier to get into that business. So that's all I could say to people is try to stick with what you know, but you definitely have to get started, but don't let that shortchange your due diligence. Just don't go overboard with it and never get started. Don't wait for that perfection moment.
Now, this podcast is actually a good example of these principles in motion, right?
Yeah.
A lot of people out there who think about starting a podcast might say to themselves, well, I'm not a good enough speaker, or I don't look the right way. I could look better than I do. I might need to get in better shape before I get in front of a camera, or maybe my voice isn't right, or maybe I don't have the right equipment or whatever. When I talk about paralysis by analysis, I think the underlying theme there is people can talk themselves out of doing what they should do if they overthink it. If you know what you're trying to accomplish, which you do, and you have the patience to wait, but you know in your heart that when that time comes, you're willing and able to act. That's kind of a different situation than being in a spot where you feel anxiety about acting and you feel insecurity about your ability. You know, when you talk about being in that boat, I say get your feet wet. You know, don't necessarily jump in to the deep end of the pool, so to speak, but take a couple of steps out there, see what happens. If it's not for you, you'll find out quickly enough. You know, as long as you're not putting in 100% of, you know, your life savings and your life work into whatever this venture is, you're not putting too much at risk that it's not worth trying. And so take some steps, find out how it feels, find out how it works, find out if this is something that you enjoy, find out if it's something that you can do. And if it's not, hey, turn back. It's all right. It is okay that everything you try doesn't work out. But the important thing is that you're willing to go, because if you aren't, then naturally you won't get anywhere.
Yeah. You know, we typically learn more from our failures than we do our successes, right? And there's a reason for that. I mean, we learn what not to do, and when we fail, that's not comfortable to us. We don't enjoy that. So that makes us grow. That makes us learn. When we succeed, and you could talk to a lot of business owners, and I would venture most of them would kind of say what I'm saying to a certain extent. When we succeed, we really don't learn as much about ourselves. And not only that, we might even start to feel a little arrogant or think things we believe or something we get our hands in could never fail. And that's actually pretty common. So I want to make sure all the listeners out there understand, don't be scared to fail. And if that's one of the reasons holding you back, that trust me, get in the game. If you fail, get back up and get in the game again. And you're going to be better the second time. But one thing I do want to say before we move on is, you know, because I think it's very important in this day and age with all the noise we have everywhere, is I want everybody to understand, you know, you touched on controlling what you could control. Well, that's so important. I can't stress that enough. And I want everyone to know that they are good enough. You know, everybody listening and everybody not listening, they are good enough to do what they want to do. You know, it doesn't matter what you look like, what your size is, what your age is, what your color is, what your intelligence level is. You are good enough to do this. You just got to do it.
Yeah, I totally agree. And that's very well said. So, and I think with that, it's time to move on to our final topic. So this one is kind of touching a little bit on current events, although it applies generally, but we're at a time where the market hasn't been performing in a fantastic positive way lately. In fact, some of the indices are very near what would be considered a correction, which would be down, you know, roughly 10% from their highs. And so emotions tend to get pretty heated when you see big gains and big dips, and we're kind of in the big dip territory. So the question is, how should you react to market volatility?
So you posed that question in an interesting way. You said, how should we react? And my answer would just be, don't. I guess is the best way I can answer that in one word. To elaborate a little bit is reaction involves emotions, which is something that shouldn't be involved when you're talking about the stock market. So, and we all have a tendency to feel that way because we're human. So yes, the market is in a little bit of a correction phase. It's volatile. It's going up. It's going down. It's making big swings. I don't have a glass ball or a crystal ball. Nobody else does. So we don't know what tomorrow's going to bring, what next week's going to bring. But what we do know in a time like this is don't panic. You know, when you see the stock market go down, I think one day last week it went down 700 or 800. It might have been almost 900 points by noon. And, you know, that was, you know, a lot of people probably panicked and thought they should sell. Well, by 4 o'clock that day, a few hours later, it was in the plus. I think it ended up the day in the green. So that just goes to show you how quickly things change. But even if it hadn't gone positive and ended up in the green, even if it was down 900 and the next day it was down 900, as long as you're taking a long-term view, which is what you and I always discuss, we're not speculators, we're not short-term investors. So for us, that doesn't matter. And actually, let me walk that back a little bit. It does matter a little bit, but the way it matters is we're going to hold our positions, but we're going to put more money in the stock market and buy the dip is what we're going to do. So that's what I would advise.
Well, that's good advice too, right? Because I think there's sometimes wisdom in going against the crowd. Sometimes there's wisdom in going with the crowd, but in a case like this, when people are reacting emotionally, look for opportunities, because people are very often guided by their emotions and their feelings. And so they see that the market is down 900 points or 5% or whatever. And so they figure, well, there's no telling how low it's going to go. So let me get off this train. And they sell at the dip.
Yep.
Well, I was listening to Ben Shapiro, and he was quoting Warren Buffett from back around the financial crisis in 08, 09. Someone had asked Warren Buffett how he felt about the market losses, you know, on his net worth or whatever. And he was, this is paraphrasing, but he basically said, I haven't suffered any losses because I haven't sold anything.
Exactly.
And that's important to remember. And it works both ways, right? You haven't realized any gains until you sell, and you haven't realized any losses until you sell. You know, as of right now, you just own however many shares of whatever companies you own if you're involved in the stock market, and that's what you have.
Yep.
So, you know, the relative value of that isn't realized until you actually pull the trigger and sell. But like you said, if you change your frame of reference and you change the way you look at things, you know, where other people see panic and fear, you see opportunity.
Yeah.
And look at the history of the market. I mean, there have been times like, you know, the stock market crash of the 20s where things went from really high to really low, and it took a very long time to recover. But if you look at the entire lifetime of the stock market, even including that period, the stock market has performed very well. The real estate market has performed very well over extensive periods of time. You know, so we've talked about this before, but I think it bears repeating in the context of this conversation. Whatever you feel about the situation, kind of pull back a little bit, take a bigger view, and see if that changes your frame of reference. See if that changes the way you feel about it. You know, because you might look at it in the context of 2022 and go, oh man, you know, January was brutal. I'm down 8% in the month of January. Back it up a little bit, How are you since the start of 2021? How are you since the start of 2020? What's your 5-year performance?
Yep.
You might have had a bad month, but you haven't had a bad 3 years. And when you realize that you're up like 30 or 40% over the last 3 years, you're going to feel a little bit better.
Well, you're 100% correct. And there's a couple rules and stuff we abide by that we've discussed on previous episodes. So first off, you should have a diversified portfolio.
Right.
Then you really shouldn't be in too many individual stocks. Probably mutual funds kind of shield your risk level there. But unless you're really involved in it and you really put your due diligence in it, and then you can be in individual stocks, but that takes a lot of time that most of us don't have. And not only that, there shouldn't be money in the stock market that you need 6 months from now. So even if the 20s, it was, it came back a couple years, went back down, and then it was 3-4 years at least, I think, before it started coming back. Well, that's why we say, if you need that money within 5 years, it doesn't belong in the stock market anyway, right? So now that we've gotten past that, if that money is in the stock market and we've had a 15-20% correction, who cares, right? What does it matter to you? If it doesn't matter to me, I'm not using that money right now. I know I don't need that money to live. I don't need the money to pay my electrical bill. So that's what investing is all about. If you need the money, that's not investing money. That's money you need to cash flow to pay your bills. So that's something that really makes a world of difference, I think, when you can separate it like that, and you can internally tell yourself, well, this money's going in there and I don't need it for 5 years. So if the market goes down, what does it matter? Why do I all of a sudden need to pull it out? Because your dynamics don't change, right?
Right. Well, and one other thing I would add to this conversation is, remember the reason you made your initial decisions to begin with.
Yep.
So if you say have some money that you want to invest in the stock market, you're going to have an idea of the kind of performance that you would like to see over a certain period of time. So if your period of time is 5 years, and you're looking around and going, what can I do in 5 years if I say buy bonds? Or what can I do in 5 years if I put it in a savings account or a CD or a money market account? And you're looking around going, okay, well, 0.6% over here if I put it in a savings account.
Yep.
Or 2 to 3% if I put it in a bond, or 7 to 10% if I put it in a stock market fund. And so that's what you do. You put it in a stock market fund. Well, if you did that 2 years ago, you're looking at this and going, man, over the course of the last 2 years, I'm way ahead of schedule, most likely. So yeah, it might have been a bad month, but if your entire point in the beginning was, I wanted to make a 7% return over 5 years, look at where you are on that. Now, if you're 2+ years in and you're way behind that curve, I would say it might be time to evaluate whether you need to change your strategy or not.
Yeah.
But don't do it because of the performance of 1 month. Make that decision based on a larger time period where you can say, okay, I assumed that by investing in this fund or in this sector or whatever, that I would have better performance than I realized. That warrants a change of course. That warrants me doing something else. But saying, oh, well, the month of January was rough, that warrants a change of course, that's probably not a good idea.
Oh yeah, you're 100% right. You can't look on that. You can't react on such a short-term event when you're talking about a because for most of us, it's a retirement account. We're in our 20s, 30s, 40s. Even in your 40s, you got 25 years before you're going to need it. And another aspect of that is you don't magically need all of your retirement account once you hit a certain age, right? You're only going to take a percentage of it every year, and it's going to continue to grow. So even if you're in your 40s, that money's going to be in there for 40 years if the average life expectancies and a person lives to their 80s. I want to give you an example. And I was looking at a screen. I've got my monitor, another monitor up, kind of tracking some of the movements in the after hours of the market. This is just an example. I don't endorse this stock whatsoever. So for anybody listening out there, this is an endorsement for them. But Facebook or Meta platforms, or I think they're called now. But anyway, I think they reported earnings today from what I can gather. And after hours, don't quote me on this, but their stock is all of a sudden down after hours, somewhere around 25% right now. It's they were at 323. I think they're in the 240s right now. And when I see something like that, now I'm not saying, like I said, just full disclosure, I have no idea. I haven't read this specific article or done my specific due diligence on this specific stock. But in most cases, you see something like this happen and you go, wow, we have this company that's done well for 15 and 20 years. They have a 20-year track record. And then all of a sudden, overnight, they just lost 25% of their value. Is that legitimate? You kind of say to yourself. So you need to do your due diligence and your research, but that's a pretty small chance that any company just woke up one day and said, wow, we were worth 1 million today and now we're worth 750. That's a big drop, when they have such an established track record.
Right. And the odds are, even if they were overvalued when they started the day, they're probably not 25% overvalued.
Exactly.
That's where you look at it and go, I think emotion might have gotten the better of a lot of people.
Well, that's it.
Maybe now's the time to do some research and find out if it's a good time to buy, right?
It might be. I've never followed Facebook when it comes to stock investing, so I don't know. But it could be. I mean, that is a substantial drop, and it's not very common. 10%, yeah, that's correction territory. 25%, that's not a typical earnings miss to cause that.
Yeah, I agree. If you didn't know the name of the company and it was just abstract company A,
yeah,
you'd look at that and go, yeah, they probably didn't legitimately lose 25%. They probably weren't overpriced that much, right? So what's the reason for this other than emotion?
Exactly.
Look into it a little bit. The fundamentals may not be there. There might be some significant issues. If that's the case, you'll find out. But if you see this happen to abstract company A, you might also find it's a good time to buy. So
yeah. Well, and that's what I use these times for, right? And that's what you and I talk about a lot. And we said that earlier. So I think the market's going to be a little more volatile in 2022 than it was the past 3 years. I don't know what it's going to end this year. Nobody does, but I think there will be ups and downs. So the best advice I have for that is just hold on. Don't overreact. Don't panic to the money you have in there. But there will be buying opportunities for certain investments at certain times if you're paying attention. So just keep your emotions out of it. And at the end of the day, even if you don't buy more because you don't have extra funds lying around to buy a dip, that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. Stay the course. As long as your investment goals and strategies haven't changed and your needs and your wants haven't changed, stay the course. And at the end of the day, you're going to be fine.
I think you're absolutely right. And I think that's a great place for us to wrap things up for this episode. For those of you that have hung with us, we certainly appreciate you. We are glad that you're here tuning in. We hope you continue to do so if you're listening to us over audio podcast. Please subscribe on your favorite podcast directory. Leave us feedback, especially if you're on Apple or Google or any platform which allows you to leave feedback. It's very helpful for us. If you're watching us on YouTube or Rumble, we appreciate it. Please subscribe. Please leave some comments or feedback. And if you have any thoughts, any questions that you'd like us to address, any topics you'd like us to discuss, please reach out to us. You can do that by emailing us at thepurposefulpodcast@convergentdigitalmedia.com. Until next time, we'll see you again on the Purposeful Podcast.
Thanks for listening to the Purposeful Podcast with Matt Fiebig and Saki Filios. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Make sure to join us on Locals at thepurposefulpodcast.locals.com and find us on YouTube and Rumble by searching for the Purposeful Podcast. If you like this podcast, don't forget to rate and review. This has been a production of Convergent Digital Media. Visit convergentdigitalmedia.com for more info. Thanks again for listening to the Purposeful Podcast.